Good morning. Welcome to this session on healthcare reform. I'm Rudy Navari. I'm in the College of Science here at the university, also a practicing medical oncologist, and so I see evidence of healthcare reform every day on a regular basis. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes to solve this problem. That shouldn't be a problem, I don't think, for our two distinguished speakers today. We actually are very privileged to have Professor Engelhardt and Professor Dougherty to talk about this problem. I was speaking to David Solomon earlier this week, and I said, I know we have bioterrorism, I know we have Iraq, but I really do think the next big crisis in this country and the world may be healthcare. And for those of you who work in healthcare, I think you might understand that, because we have lots of problems which are not going away. Let's get started with the first speaker. The speakers are going to speak for about 20 minutes. We really want to have questions, make this an interactive session, so don't be bashful about asking questions. First speaker is Professor Tristram Engelhardt, who holds an MD with honors at Tulane University and a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Currently, Dr. Engelhardt is professor in the Department of Medicine, as well as departments of Community Medicine and OBGYN at Baylor College of Medicine. In addition, a professor at the Department of Philosophy at Rice University. He is the editor of Journal of Medicine and Philosophy, co-editor of Christian Bioethics, co-editor of Philosophy of Medicine, and has published well over 200 articles, peer-reviewed articles, and chapters. And he is known for his non-controversial issues in many areas. So welcome, Dr. Engelhardt.
Let me make sure that I don't have you stay in this room under false assumptions. I've not come here to solve the problem, but to make it more difficult. As Kierkegaard said, with so many people trying to solve problems, someone has to make them difficult again, so those who seek solutions will be employed. Also, to take a line from Stanley Auerbach, who remarked last night that those who are engaged in police work are just one class above the criminal class, let me also point out that I am a retired deputy sheriff. What I'm going to argue today is that it's very important for traditional Christians to radically rethink their complicity in healthcare reform. Because some ways of engaging in healthcare reform are morally allowable, others I take to be morally prohibited. I will argue that the concern attempt to establish a one-payer, all-encompassing healthcare system indirectly supports a culture of death, and therefore should be seen as an immoral undertaking. I will do that by indicating the moral problems associated with an all-encompassing, one-payer system that make it an immoral endeavor to be associated with. Some of the difficulties are apparent to one reflecting on issues just in secular ethics. And before I read my small little presentation, I was going to again give you a view of what I'm about to say. So the first point is that one-payer systems that are all-encompassing have to, in the end, trade on an egalitarianism of envy, and that's evil. I'm going to distinguish, for those who haven't heard it, my distinction between an egalitarianism of altruism and one of envy. World 1, good, simple philosopher's world with 10 people in it, and all 10 have 6 units of the good. World 2, 10 people again, 9 people have 6 units of the good, and one has 10. If you think World 2 is worse than World 1, you're an egalitarian of envy. No one was made worse off, one person was made better off, and the sum amount of good in that universe is greater. World number 3, again, as you guessed, 10 people, 9 people have 6 units of the good, and one has 1. If you ask yourself how cheaply possible to bring the person who is suffering, well, only have 1, up toward 6, you're an egalitarian of altruism. Canada is beset by the egalitarianism of envy. Most healthcare systems in the world are moved by an egalitarianism of altruism, where they ask the answerable question: how can we most cheaply provide to everyone a basic, but not best, healthcare system? It's like Canada said, well, we'll give everyone Volvos, but then they realized they couldn't afford Volvos, and said all you can have is a Ford. Now, other countries have attempted to create something like a cheap Volkswagen car, and you can buy up to BMW, or if you wish. But the very focus on the egalitarianism of envy is corruptive of the moral character, besides having the real impact of not being able to direct us to the very important scientific issue: how do we, with our finite resources, help those in need most efficiently, which is an obligation in charity. Secondly, the focus on healthcare reform is a major issue. It evokes the passion to postpone death. Christians should not be afraid of death. The whole technological imperative comes from people who do not know that the truth of the universe is that when you die, you go before the dread judgment seat of Christ, and that is what all humans should prepare for. And healthcare can postpone it a little bit, and if you haven't yet repented, it's probably good to say, I'll need a little bit more ICU before I can really repent of my sins. But an all-encompassing investment is, it would seem to be for traditional Christians, really distorting of the moral life. And lastly, to establish an all-encompassing healthcare system is, in our post-Christian culture, our post-traditional culture, to establish it within a system that's very likely to be committed to a culture of death. One that will teach, just like public schools teach, a view of responsible reproduction, namely prenatal testing and abortion. And as we go to the future, when healthcare is very likely in the next 20 years to round out the demographic curve so that people tend to live to be 90 rather than dying in their 70s, but with more morbidities. And so the solution will be physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. If you have an all-encompassing one-payer system, it will be embedded in a culture of death against which we should all struggle. Here starts the paper. I'm going to take a sip of water. There would be absolutely no difficulty in providing funds for a basic health care system to cover all Americans, were it not for the egalitarianism of envy. That is, one could create a Spartan basic coverage for all Americans that would provide considerable protection against morbidity risks. For example, in 1997, the United States invested about $3,925 per person in health care, while Greece invested only $974. The increased investment in the United States did not provide a perceptible advantage for life expectancy. American males and females at birth had a life expectancy of 72.7 for males and 79.4 for females in the United States, compared to the poor Greeks who had invested about 1/4 as much in health care, who had, for males, a life expectancy of 75, and the women a life expectancy of 80.4, 1 year longer. The differences in health care expenditure were primarily in terms of understandings of protection against mortality lost in the noise. Surely the Greek healthcare system doesn't provide the same protection against morbidity for those, for example, who engage in unnatural acts such as jogging, who then need to have new knees put in and various other problems from these. The Greeks will not be that responsive, so part of the difference in the expenditure turns on morbidity versus mortality relief. It should be noted also that of the 42 million so-called uninsured in the United States, that they're a very heterogeneous group. About 5 million of these have incomes over 75,000, while only 17 million have incomes less than 25,000. And most of those are between the ages of 18 and 35, unless they're really bad joggers, not high cost centers, which means that one could create a basic Spartan healthcare system. If we weren't hostage to the demon of envy, they would cover everyone with a cheap Ford stripped-down fashion of healthcare. What is the challenge then to providing a basic healthcare system for all? The answer is envy. Here one must distinguish the egalitarianism again of egalitarianism of envy versus altruism. If you worry about people getting more, then we'll fight forever. If you worry about how cheaply designing a system that will cover everyone, but realize we'll give up on the view of equal care, we could do that. It's envy that holds us back. The challenge for human beings is, under this circumstance, that we won't face the cost of thinking through clearly that we should give up health care as something that has to be done evenly. It's never been done anywhere evenly. And the costs for the egalitarianism of envy are just almost overwhelming. For example, in Canada, which has embraced egalitarianism of envy, there are all of 4 MRIs in all of Toronto. In Homer, Alaska, where one of my daughters lives, there's 1. However, there are extra MRIs for veterinary clinics in Toronto. Humans may not use it because it would violate the egalitarianism of envy. But as a person having a stroke wanted to be assessed whether they were having a hemorrhagic or occlusive stroke and wanted admitted to the diagnostic equipment of the veterinary hospital, it was explained, no, that would violate basic human rights. Further difficulties beset healthcare reform that turn on the absolutization of medicine because of the failure to face finitude. All humans are going to die. Christians should understand that's good. I mean, we're going to finally be with Christ. The challenge for human beings then is for them to realize that we are finite. Human resources are limited. There are not enough resources to postpone death forever. There are not enough resources to do away with all morbidity. And the horrible thing about medicine, all the truths that we know are stochastic, that is probabilistic, and so the best we can do is do reasonable gambles with life. If we don't do that, we don't teach our children and our grandchildren what it is to be a finite being. You can only imagine how bad it must have been to be my daughters. When my daughters first began to drive, I told them to go out and expose themselves to leukemia. And they said, Daddy, what do you mean? I said, well, when you go into a gas station, you self-tank, and that's probably going to increase the chance of leukemia 10 times, but it's so low, just as a background thing, it's worth saving the 15 cents. But if you want to have somebody else be exposed to get leukemia, you're going to have to pay on your own. I'm not paying for that. Okay. All of the choices we make have to be within the context of realizing that we are finite beings with finite resources, all of whom will die, and we've got to take gambles. And to not instruct a society about that, and then take a gamble by creating a basic, not all-encompassing healthcare system, is to instruct people falsely about the human condition. In addition, the development of new innovations is costly and time-consuming. Yet, for example, we're currently facing the emergence of numerous drug-resistant microbes as well as the introduction of microbes to part of the world which have not been previously endemic. Consider, for example, the West Nile virus in DDT. Right now, about 1 million people in the world, primarily in the third world, die because of malaria. We could wipe it out with DDT. DDT has a very small connection with any cancer in humans, but it does make condor eggshells thinner. So as you think about the 1 million people dying around the world of malaria, or you worry about dying of West Nile virus, there's another kind of balance that's being created in every healthcare system, us or the condor eggs. The point is, all healthcare policy has to be created, not discovered, because we won't agree about how to balance the 1 million people dying in the third world versus condor eggs. I'm in favor of saving the people. If one chooses to have cheaper drugs, and cheaper drugs for the first world and the third world, one will have fewer drugs. Because money will go into making video games where people can make unconscionable profits. And we won't make all the expensive industry drugs that will help in the end, both the third world and the first world. That is, Americans and humans generally seem not to have thought through what it is to be finite one more time. To have continued healthcare innovation for the first and third world, you have to pay for it. The view is, well, we'd really like to have drugs free. Well, it's unlikely that you'll be able to do that. and sort of a childish response of my children, I would like to have a better car than Daddy gave me. So, well, you'll have to buy it. Well, I don't have the money. When this failure to face finitude that is combined with American healthcare ideology that we should provide the best of care, equal care, have physician and patient choice, which is incompatible with cost containment, one has a system that is ungovernable. The only way out is either to impose a uniform system such as Canada, which will have the following course: stifling innovation, restricting freedom, and rewarding an egalitarianism of envy, where the dogs get the MRIs but the humans don't. Or one can instead do what most of the world has done, and what the Oregon plan is doing, and what Utah has just begun to do, namely to propose to provide basic adequate care for everyone. In the face of inequalities, realize that others will have better basic and luxury, and then try to fund healthcare innovation out of the luxury tier. This approach is the one I think in the end will help us to step best away from the egalitarianism of envy and best away from the view that we don't have to face human finitude, because it requires us to think through the costs of our particular choice. What do Christians have to say about all of this? First of all, Christians understand that the prize is not living as long as possible here, but eternal salvation. And if we don't know that, then I take it you've missed what it is to be a Christian. One of my daughters, we were talking about going back to Constantinople with her and her kids, and somebody said, well, you know, I said, well, you know, they're shooting off us Christians in Constantinople. And my daughter said, hey, Daddy, that's first class to heaven. You don't get better than that. I presume that's the traditional Christian view. You're not really interested in living forever, but dying repentant for salvation. Therefore, as Christians, we're obliged individually and collectively to relativize concerns with health care. St. Basil the Great, who lived from 329 to 379, is clear on this point. He said, whatever requires an undue amount of thought or trouble or involves a large expenditure of effort and causes our whole life to revolve about it as around the solicitude of the flesh should be avoided. You can decide whether we've gotten to St. Basil's level or not, but to just make health care reform as a focus of consummate Christian concern, if you're doing more than wanting to have a basic package, would seem to me to run aground of St. Basil's warning. It is remarkable that many Christians are willing to pay 14% of the gross domestic product there's one out of every $7 for health care, while very few, fewer than should, actually tithe and give alms directly in services and resources to others. However, the traditional Christian commitment is to life through prayer, fasting, and personal almsgiving of resources and services. Christians have further grounds for being very concerned regarding the erection of a one-payer, all-encompassing health care system, and the reason is simple. It is very likely to become, once established, an all-encompassing, post-traditional, post-Christian health care system with radically non-Christian views regarding the proper character of reproduction, all the way from artificial insemination by donor gametes to Viagra for fornicators. Two, which it has a lot in Texas. I mean, that's a big market. Two, the character of responsible reproduction. Now the notion of responsible reproduction gives you a responsible parent. You have to have prenatal diagnosis and selective abortion, because that also contains healthcare costs. So if the healthcare costs go up in an all-encompassing system, you're going to look for ways to restrict it, and the way to restrict it is to teach people a responsible ethos of reproduction, which will not be congenial traditional Christians. And then the proper character of terminal care. There will be immense pressure for physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, as life expectancy is extended without amelioration of morbidity. The likelihood of being Alzheimer's at the age of 80 is 30 to 35%, looking at different studies. And there's good evidence that we're going to square the curve out, that is, more people are going to live to be 95, and those people are not going to want to live in that circumstance because they have lost the notion of what suffering is about, and the costs will tempt people to use ways to bring death more soon. Therefore, it will be highly imprudent of Christians to support in any way an all-encompassing one-payer system, for it will bring with it, just as with our public schools today, an all-encompassing post-Christian, post-traditional morality that will seductively coerce Christians to abandon authentic Christian morality. The office of Christians, then, is to relativize health care. It ain't that important. 2, to undermine the passions supporting an egalitarianism of envy. That's a perversion of human character. To aid humans to face their finitude, making their first priority salvation rather than longer and more pain-free life. That's good, but it's not the first priority. To struggle against the establishment of an all-encompassing one-payer system that will bring with it an ethos hostile to traditional Christianity, while also supporting Christians in their personal obligation to give alms of their resources and their services to others. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. I think that for those of you who are providers in healthcare, thinking about how you should provide that care to patients, and how often do we consider the values of the system we work in or those of patients in providing that care. I think Professor Engelhardt gave us a lot of food for thought, and we'll entertain some questions after the next speaker. Next speaker is Professor Dougherty. He received his master's degree and PhD degree in philosophy at the University of Notre Dame. Spent a large portion of his career at Creighton University with appointments as professor of philosophy, medicine, pharmacy, dentistry, and nursing. From 1988 to 1995, he was director of Creighton Center for Health Policy and Ethics, and from 1995 until 2001, he was vice president of academic affairs at Creighton University. In August of 2001, became the 13th president of Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. He has written numerous books and articles on healthcare ethics, and we're pleased to have him speak to us today.
Thank you for that reception and that introduction. The first thing I want to say is how much I envy Triss's command of the podium. It certainly would be a better world if he had less energy up here and I had more. I want to ask you to pay attention to the content of what he said and the content of what I say, and while certain things will look like they're the opposite ends of the world, we actually have a great deal in common. For me, the basic issue of healthcare reform is securing the right to healthcare for all. And I'm going to restrict my focus, of course, to the United States context, but this is a universal issue. And the way to get, the most obvious, reasonable way to get universal health care coverage and to therefore acknowledge a right to health care for all is through universal health insurance. That's a matter of fact. It's not a necessity, but that's the way we've done it. To the extent that we've done it is provide for the financing through an insurance scheme. Now, let me begin with some basics. Christians, because of our belief in creation by God, and because of our understanding of our spiritual destiny, have, each of us, a human dignity. That is to say, we regard each other, or ought to, as being of incalculable worth. Human dignity, in turn, that estimate of our worth, and this is not, of course, ignoring original sin and all that goes with that, but human dignity is the grounds for human rights, our obligation to respect the dignity of others and ourselves. So the fundamental human right is to be treated as a person with dignity. And all the other human rights, I believe, can be seen to flow from that. In Catholic tradition, and in many other religious traditions, though I don't pretend to know them all, rights are not only the ones we're most comfortable with as Americans, which are freedoms from tyranny, arbitrary treatment, restrictions on speech, expression of religion, but they're also rights of access to the fundamentals needed to live a life in accord with human dignity. The one that we're most familiar with is the right to education or literacy. But I would argue there is a right to food, clothing, shelter, and I would include health care. And this is, of course, for those of you who follow this, I'm saying some very simple things, but I want to lay the groundwork. This is the position of the Catholic Church, it's the position of the U.S. bishops, it's the position of the Pope, etc. So I'm just sort of laying out, I think, as a sort of middle-of-the-road understanding of some of these issues. Now, obviously, and I think here is where Tris and I have common ground, obviously such a right has to be a limited right. A right to education, for example, is not a right to a PhD or to indefinite adult continuing education. Any right of that sort in which something must be provided for the right to be realized must have limits. So when I speak about a right to health care, what I'm meaning, even if I don't always say it, is a right to a basic package of health care benefits. Everything for everybody, as Tris suggested, would be an impossible goal, financially impossible. It would get us on a treadmill that would be literally impossible to sustain in the long run. Now, what is basic health care? Of course, that has no meaning in and of itself. It has to be situated culturally. It probably means something different in Greece than it does in the United States. It certainly means something different in third world nations. Not to say human dignity is different, but how the culture that surrounds it, supports, and makes things available does in fact shape what's basic. But I think in our culture it would certainly include standard prenatal care, pediatric and emergency care of at least a minimal sort, coverage for a host of medical interventions and drug therapies, critical care, rehabilitations, some measure of mental health care. We can debate, what the standards are in all of these and how to pay for them. Long-term care, nursing care, etc. A shorthand for it would be a basic package might look like what a family of average means gets as a benefit at work, because most of us get our health insurance through a fringe benefit at work. So one might look at all the plans out there and target one that was at the mean or somewhat just below the mean and say, for now, that represents pretty much a cultural understanding, implicit, as to what is basic health care. Now, why haven't we been able to do this? Well, let me just say first, we haven't been able to do it. There's about 41 million Americans now who have no health insurance because it's not a benefit where they work. About 80% of that number are people in families where mom or dad or both are working full-time, but not getting the benefit of health insurance as a fringe, and they're not making enough money to buy it themselves. To buy health insurance by yourself is prohibitively expensive for most people, even relatively well-off people. What's the consequence? Study after study has indicated that people without health insurance seek and get health care later, as a rule have poorer health, and therefore suffer more from preventable diseases, and in fact die prematurely, in the sense that they might have lived longer had they got what their neighbors around them get on a routine basis. And I would say that undermines our obligation to respect them as persons in the standard to which our culture has evolved. Now, let me move from that sort of conceptual piece to talk a little bit about the politics and what's happened, and is there any hope for progress here. The last time we made a serious effort at this began in the late 80s because a number of forces came together. One is the traditional liberal social justice movements, which were led by unions, churches, Family USA, and other organizations of that sort. Businesses who felt battered by escalating healthcare costs as a sort of out-of-control piece of their budgets. Professional and institutional providers who were faced with patients who had no means to pay, and they were uncompensated care. How were doctors and hospitals going to cope with this? And a general public that was really concerned about where the healthcare system was going. There was some energy behind it. As you know, it came undone by the mid-90s. Why? A number of factors. The power of the health insurance industry felt threatened by this. I would also name the AMA as having some culpability because they gave early signs that they were supporting this and then vacillated at the end. Certainly the ineptitude of the way it was handled by the Clinton administration as part of this. They presented an exceptionally complex plan, surrounded it with secrecy, if you remember this. The political partisanship of that day, the visceral dislike and virtual hatred of Clinton almost from day one by large sections of the country poisoned, I think, our ability to have any serious discussion about this. At the same time, managed care was showing some prospect of holding costs down, so maybe we could deal with that outside of the health insurance scheme. And at the same time, the booming economy was keeping the numbers of uninsured lower than it otherwise might be, so it looked like maybe we didn't need it. But I would say, culturally, the largest issue here is that there was a resurgence of what I would regard as our traditional American individualism over concerns for the common good. A preference we typically have for market solutions, opposition to government and taxes, and a deep, deep ambivalence that we have about poverty. Is it something that just happens to people, or is it their own fault? And that sort of runs through our culture. And race. Are we committed to helping others in our own country who don't really look like us or seem to come from a different kind of background? So ironically, by the time the 90s boom had erased the deficit and began generating the surpluses that could have funded universal insurance, by that point, this was off the table. It was a dead issue politically. No one was even willing to talk about it. Well, what's possible in the future? What's happening now is the numbers of uninsured are rising again. Within the last year and a half, 2 million more people lost their insurance. Double-digit cost increases are back for insurers, for employers. There is now a rising cost of prescription drugs, more litigation, more malpractice insurance increase. We now, unfortunately, know that either managed care failed or the public failed to accept it. So we've gone through that, and now we've sort of reversed that energy. There is now, of course, a heightened public skepticism of corporations with the CEO scandals and of unfettered markets, which was the part of the pillar of the alternative solution in the 90s. And, of course, has been suggested already, our population continues to age. And so the problem not solved has just been deferred. It's still with us. Can it be solved? I think it can be solved if three things come together. One, we have to offer a simple solution. Right? Those of you who remember, the Clinton healthcare plan was a thick book like this. It was ridiculed by others who put up large maps that showed if you go here and then there and then there, and it looked like a Rube Goldberg machine. The simplest thing to do, and I'm not saying this is the only way, but if you want to get your idea on what is the simplest way, take our universal health insurance program that we have now. We have one. Unfortunately, it's age-based. You have to be 65 to get it. But once you're 65, everybody gets it. That's our universal health insurance coverage, and make it for everybody. All right? Now, we'd have to sit down and talk about the implications of that, but that would be the simplest thing to do. And of course, Medicare, as you know, enjoys a great deal of political popularity, and it is a relatively efficient system compared with its private competitors. So that's the first. It's got to be simple, and it's got to be sold that way, politically. Second, we have to come to a point where we're willing to think about the common good here and not my taxes go up for somebody else's benefit. So long as that dominates the discussion, I don't think we move in the right direction. And finally, I would say it falls to us, I think, Christians in particular, the responsibility to promote the view of the dignity of persons, of the right to the basics, and a view that we are, as Paul pointed out, all linked together as part of the mystical body of Christ. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just take 1 minute and point out a couple of things that was pointed out by both speakers. We've had no leadership in this country in healthcare reform. Certainly physicians not taking any leadership in this area, and they really should be criticized for that. Hospitals have certainly not taken any leadership. They're really interested in their own interests, been very inefficient, and encourage rather than discourage healthcare reform. We don't have to say anything about Congress. They don't want to touch the issue because they're worried about their own political futures. And let's not forget patients who have also been many times very irresponsible in demanding certain things in terms of what they want for themselves and the family. We all would agree that a young child with asthma should have health care. We should always also agree that a 45-year-old person who comes in and asks for a total body scan just to see if they have anything wrong with them is not reasonable and should be discouraged and say you can't have this. And finally, a 75-year-old with stage 4 lung cancer, which we have limited treatments for, should be offered supportive care only and not a lot of other things. But families and patients don't see it that way many times. So let's all think about that, and let's take questions for our speakers and see how we can solve this problem. That's in the back. Can you? Yes.
Professor Engelhardt, you explained egalitarianism and you're asking free will. And my question is for you, or I have if egalitarianism, an example of egalitarianism of envy is someone who thinks a world where 9 people have 6 units, one person has 10, is worse than a world where 10 people have 6 units. That counts as egalitarianism. In World War, where 9 people have 6 units, and one person has 1,000 units, that makes me think World War is worse than World War. Right? In terms of egalitarianism.
Sure.
The second question is, imagine a healthcare system where 90% of those who are HIV positive do not have access to protease inhibitors that necessarily damage these, and 10% do. Is that world more like my world or your world?
It depends on how you respond. If you try to make it difficult for the 10% to continue to have access, then it's an egalitarianism of envy. If you ask yourself, how can I most cheaply get protease inhibitors to the other 90%, you're pursuing an egalitarianism of altruism. Now, the interesting thing is physicians did shoulder healthcare reform debates. Don Kitzhaber, the Democratic governor of Oregon, did, and Gore and demagogically argued against it. He was a guy who was in private practice, left and became governor, and said what we can do is create an all-encompassing system, and we'll invest, this was 1992, the same amount of money per capita for the poor that Canada does, $2,000. And if you want to buy more, you can buy more. The view is, if something's out in the economy, it is silly to say to a person, if they just want to pay it, it's not going to be reimbursed or written off against tax. I like to have a whole body scan. Because if you let another people do that, all of a sudden the economy of scale will be so that that's as cheap as computers are now. So that it becomes a purchase like buying Jaguars. So then in the end you can get whole body scanners to the third world because they become cheap, like transistor radios. And there's a sort of Luddite inability to look at the history of technology. and to recognize that what you want to ask is how can you make everyone in the world able to have these very expensive things? And the idea is, well, for a while, some will be more expensive, not everyone will get there. I will now make you think I'm a communist. Deng Xiaoping began in the 80s to put up a big sign, and it said, someone must get rich first. If no one gets rich first, all of China will starve. Now, what he understood is you could develop innovation in China. Before you knew it, it's very hard to have the 100,000 units of the good in it not touch others. So what happened in China, the first time I went there in 1979, they had terrible health care. Now, in the big cities, they have full, for-profit, cash-on-the-barrelhead health care. But the economies of scale are now reaching out to others. So they understood that egalitarianism of altruism, that is, you want everybody to get as much as they can as cheaply as possible, but understood if you stop someone from getting rich first, you'll never have the protease inhibitors for the future. Imagine how stupid it was to take away the patents for the companies with the protease inhibitors. If you wanted to get the money to the third world, we should have bought it and we should have sent the protease inhibitors there. If you do away with the profit you can make from a drug in the third world, do you think you're going to encourage people to invest it in the future? No. Do you think there are all kinds of terrible diseases you'd hope to be able to help people in the third world? Yes. So there's often a failure to be able to look at the history of innovation. Innovation is such that initially it's only available to some. You and I are both old enough to remember what computers were like in the 50s, with cords and all of that. No individual person can own a computer. Now, most Americans can own a computer, many people in the third world. If you don't understand the history of technological development, you will damn the people in the third world. And if you don't understand the notion of technological development, you'll damn the people in the United States as in Canada. I was in Vancouver speaking there, and on the front page of the Canadian newspaper, they had sent some of their equipment to the Philippines. The Philippines turned it down, saying it was too outdated and would cause too many false positives, and they would, so the Canadians should keep their low technology system to themselves. What you want to do is what Kitzhaber said, cover everyone with a basic package. Now, the people who are egalitarians of envy, Gore and amongst them, said this is terrible. Kitzhaber says, how could that be terrible? You'll cover everyone, and you'll cover them at the same level as Canada, but you'll do one thing the Canadians never did. You'll ask, how, with each intervention, can I do it most cheaply to most advantage the people in Oregon? And that makes a scientific question posable and answerable. If you're just worried about making sure people don't get to a veterinarian MRI, you will not help the people of Canada. Yes.
I'm afraid I can't let that part of the lie.
I didn't think you would. My only question was, how long would it take you to respond?
Bill Gates would love that argument. Lion store bottles would be mystified by it. And all the people who connected the software that essentially coded the human genome built on a free software foundation and that stuff would also be mystified by their argument.
Well, tell me, you cash in the claim. Because you're talking about technologies which grew up in a society where lots of innovation was, in fact, supported. And there have been a lot of people working in economics reflecting on how innovation takes place. So cash in your claim.
Well, I think what I want to do is step aside from that for a second. Your idea that you can fund the research out of the green sector is, I think, unsupported. But what I really want you to ask those people that are here that are still going to go to medical school is, how are either of you going to fund medical education?
Well, medical education is one of those goods that benefits a lot of people who don't pay for the production of the good, without getting into technical terms. And so, since World War II, we have paid for it through tuition, but that's a very small part of how you fund it. even in private schools. We pay for it through the Medicare program because the government realized that we're creating a social common good here to have physicians available in large numbers in our society. And no one sees it as their immediate responsibility. And so it's traditionally the responsibility of the government to manage those elements of the common good. So I think that if that spigot is being turned off, and it's certainly being tightened, we have to have some other common mechanism to subsidize medical education. Tax on health insurance or something of that sort, where everybody's paying in some equitable fashion. It is a very expensive form of education. I mean, those are some of my initial thoughts. Since I have the floor, could I say a couple of just a quick other things? I think to this earlier question, and I think maybe Tris was saying part of this in his response, is I think it makes all the difference in the world whether you have, if in your world, 4, if you have one person has 1,000 and the other 9 have 6, I think you have to look at it dynamically, not just as a snapshot. And if in year 1 that's the case, and in year 2 it's 1,010 and everybody else has 5, now you know your system's going in the wrong direction. But if the trickle down that we're hearing here is actually working so that in year 3 you've got 1,010, but you've got 7s over here, then I think you can tolerate the disparities because they're working in everybody's best interest. That, to me, I think is the heart of the question.
Just to pick up, if I might, the reason I'm a little bit more subdued than usual is that I spent last weekend in Paris with about 30 people, Nobel Prize winners and economists, trying to think about what the future's challenges are going to be. And they were focusing on innovation. Well, the major challenges that they thought was, in fact, that we'd extend life before we could ameliorate morbidity, and that would have real impacts upon not just costs, but on positions such as suicide and euthanasia. The other was how innovation does seem to only take place in capitalist countries. I take it God wants us to harness our energies, even our passions, and we do them lightly. It's good. If lust is bad in general, but some interest for one's spouse is good. Greed put within a taxing system where the person who's got 1,000 units is paying both tax on the property owned as well as earned, then you redistribute. But the interesting thing was the Soviet Union was never able to make a PC. Remember when the Soviet Union was collapsing? There were laws against American taking PCs over to the Soviet Union. They couldn't make it. With 35% of their gross domestic product put into defense, they couldn't make a PC. Greed in California and the Pacific Rim made a PC. The peculiar thing right now, the pharmaceutical industry for the world depends upon the United States, because only the United States are the margins high enough to bring money in to produce drugs rather than video games. In a sense, we charitably, by every time we are gouged by the drug companies, we're helping people all over the world. I think that's a good thing. One has to think through how we're going to maintain innovation to meet a whole set of challenges for the future, one of which is to try to do away with the morbidity that's going to exist with this large group of people who are going to have longer lifespan, and that's going to require device innovation as well as pharmaceutical innovation. Otherwise, we're going to have a real collision course with some very unpleasant moral mandates from a secular government, including physicians such as suicide.
Just remember that we now have a national health care insurance, as we mentioned earlier, with Medicare. Medicare funds medical schools and funds academic medical centers, indigent care, academic medical centers. But the government currently has said we want a Medicare neutral budget. So we are going to have a big crisis. And we also provide care for children through the CHIPS program. So we're talking about care from people in the middle age group. And it's going to come. It's just a question of how we're going to pay for it. What else are we going to say? You had a question.
Sort of in the spirit of Dr. Engelhardt's suggestion about making things more difficult, I'm wondering about how we move from the kind of system that we have now to the kind that you're advocating here. It seems that since part of the current system involves through government subsidies or through private insurance companies putting large sums to fund private insurance for their employees, than just sort of those with luxury through which innovation is being funded. So that if we start shifting to just basic care for those people and allowing people to pay more to get more, it seems like the base from which we're going to be funding these advances in technology is going to be shrinking, which is going to lead to greater expenses for those involved, for those in the luxury class, which involves a kind of lowering of the level at which they're going to fund. And it particularly gets even more difficult given the comment that you just made about the United States' role in developing these technologies over the entire world. If sort of U.S., including the poor, is subsidizing this, the poor in the U.S. is subsidizing the development of these drugs for the world, is it, right, that just...
I'm with you all the way. There are two things. Again, I'm just slowly getting over my jet lag. The reason you wouldn't want to use as the benchmark what is mandated by most private insurance for employers, it's full of all kinds of things that we wouldn't want. In vitro fertilization, I mean, just it'd be a crazy thing to start with. You'd want to rethink the whole thing before you went further. The point is that there's not really an uninsured population of this. Of the people who are indigent were in 1992 expending per capita through uncompensated care and through county hospitals about the same that England was. So the issue is, how do you take those resources and use them more rationally? If you could create a healthcare system twice as affluent as Greece that wouldn't, in fact, create that much more costs on everybody, would be a stripped-down version. You'd have to tell people, like my daughters, you would be, if you want more, you'll have to buy more, and it would not be written off against taxes. It would be like any other luxury expenditure. Would that be sufficient to drive our interest in innovation? I don't know. It may be the only thing that is feasible, because we surely wouldn't want a Canadian system to happen, because then everything gets locked in, and we stagnate in a way that would be horrible, not only for us, but the world that depends on the innovations being generated from us. Norbert Welsh, you've heard me mention this metaphor 1,000 times. The United States is a very peculiar place. It's an airline metaphor. You have to stand around the ticket counter until you get sick, and then you're given a first-class ticket. Other countries, everyone is guaranteed Southwest Airlines. No, I hope that's not litigious. It's a nice airlines, but you don't get a reserved seat. You just get peanuts, and that's it. It's really good. It'll get you there on time. So what we have to do is to guarantee everyone Southwest Airlines. And if you want to have full coach, first class, well, then you have to upgrade, and people upgrade. And the question is, will that be enough to drive innovation? We don't know, but it'll depend upon the ways in which one allows pharmaceuticals to sell drugs to the affluent like they do video games and Jaguars.
In the back.
How do you temper innovation with concerns about traditional Christian ethics? Because the same drug companies that can be innovating worldwide are also involved with the promotion of family planning and
I presume Christians in the United States are affluent enough to try to form their own drug companies. Imagine you had Vadicare Pharmaceuticals. And Vadicare Pharmaceuticals venture capital would come by and ask, invest. It's a real, social action funds have done well. Vadicare Pharmaceuticals would be, they're trying to keep your money so you can retire on it, but it would target the needs of the third world. It would not use it. There's no reason that can't be done, except people would be so offended by the politically incorrect character of, the Vadicare pharmaceutical agents, the Vatican flag flying and all, but it would, you think I'm joking. If we had the courage, that's what we ought to do. Well, so the only reason it doesn't happen is that people don't have the imagination. Maybe you, sir, will be the first CEO of Vadicare. Well, I presume the Pope will be, but
in a sense, that would require, of course, a lot of between here and there. But there is one way in which we have that already, and that's the Catholic hospital system. In other words, if we are moving, and I'm afraid we are, in the direction of doctor-assisted suicide in the culture as a whole, Catholic hospitals would be a refuge for us against that. They already are, in terms of abortion and other activities at the beginning of life that many of us find offensive. So I don't know if a Christian or Catholic pharmacy company is the right answer, but it certainly wouldn't be inconsistent with creating other institutions that defend your own values.
Yeah, but it's just incomprehensible that no one has tried it. I mean, Baylor College of Medicine, which has been told I have an association, has a number of venture capital firms that it gets money from to try to produce stuff to sell. Why aren't Roman Catholics with their Vaticare pharmaceuticals? I can't imagine why not. I'll buy some stock.
The other thing is, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but I think there's been a number of Catholic healthcare systems that have not lived up to their mission statement in these kinds of areas. In the back there.
Well, I was just going to say that you have to, in theory, if they really had the guts to do it, the Catholic hospital system would stand as a check against all of the death, except what's in fact been happening over and over again, including in Austin, where I'm at, is the Catholic hospital system has come under immense pressure to still provide sterilization, abortion, and so forth with tax dollars, and they sort of set up a hospital within the hospital where they outsource it. Essentially, it's an absolute complicity in evil rather than saying, no, I'm not going to do it. Another whole piece of these things is to look at the employers. Catholic employers, Catholic universities, can provide health care plans for their employees that refuse to pay for things that are evil. But they don't do that. Lots, if you look at the health care plans provided by many Catholic hospitals, Catholic businesses, universities, I included, it covers all kinds of things that are usually look like very good things.
Let me just, I don't want anybody to leave the room thinking that, I just flat out disagree that there are Catholic hospitals that are providing or subsidizing abortion in any fashion. Now, sterilization, you're correct.
In Boston, it's in fact, they're outsourcing, correct?
Well, we'd have to.
So it's in fact empirical proof.
Well, we'd have to get into material cooperation.
It's correct. After you go through it all, it will be declared that it is remote and immediate cooperation, not immediate. But it'll still be scandalous enough to erode identity, and that's the point. You may be able to meet the test, except for the one the test in the manual, which you can't give scandal. And I think it's already been lost. You've got a person scandalized there.
Well, we have different thresholds for scandal.
One thing on that, sometimes the trash on the Catholic healthcare system is easy for us to say it's all their fault. But one of the questions, how many of us are committed to, A, getting our own healthcare from Catholic healthcare institutions if we think they're a possible help for us? Or do we, just like any other consumer in America, if we know that the best rate of heart, surgery or anything else is at some other hospital, we'll all go to that hospital? And are we willing to take responsibility for our own healthcare to support systems that have ethical convictions that are consonant with our own? But when's the last time you ever heard a homily encouraging you to be involved with Catholic healthcare or get your insurance? Or to what extent have you heard of people lobbying so they can get their insurance through Catholic or other healthcare systems that actually are consonant with the culture of life? So in one sense, there's a lot we can all do in our own work, which I expect many of us, including myself, don't do as much, rather than seeing it as huge system problems of which we can just be complaining about.
I think what you've told us is that Christians have so radically lost their identity, they may not be able to reform the culture of death. Only if we radically reclaim our identity will we likely have a chance. Those who heard me earlier this morning, my mother, God rest her soul, when she was a nurse at a hospital run by the Sisters of the Incarnate Word in the 1930s, she was a Protestant. She converted later to Romanism. She was taught to greet everyone with, "Blessed be praise be the Incarnate Word." Everyone. And one understood what it stood for. It may only be if one really recaptures what it is to be committed, that one will be able to have priests who will give the sermon and people will sign up. But they'll have to have a view that when they're going there, they're getting more than just vague values. They'll have to have a sense that this is going to tend to the salvation of their souls in a way which will not happen in a secular institution. But then you'd be upfront, in-your-face Christian, which would be good, but not politically correct.
Yeah. Just remember that, there are many not-for-profit community hospitals that are closing, and being bought by the Catholic healthcare system. So the Catholic healthcare system is large and very powerful in this country and can really affect a lot of changes if they want to.
I'd just like to jump in with a happy anecdote. I'm from Valparaiso, Indiana. Our Porter County hospital, community hospital, has been doing abortion on demand for a long, long time. The pro-life people petitioned them to stop. We gathered over 10,000 petitions. The other side gathered 150. We had a public meeting. We outnumbered them 10 to 1. The testimony was so beautiful that these people was all spontaneous. It was just names drawn out of the hat. People would say, "Look, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby. I want to be someplace where they love babies as much as I love my baby. I'm afraid for my baby to come to you." They said that over and over again. We told them we would boycott them. We lost. There was the 4-3. The Board of Trustees vowed to continue abortion on demand right up into the second trimester, but and particularly targeting babies with abnormalities. But there was a tremendous outpouring of people who were standing up for their conviction, who said they would boycott. So now we have to deliver. We have to. That's our next step.
Yes.
Another question with respect to the Clinton healthcare reform proposal. Abortion was included within it. And in the appeals of the common good, must not the common good be based on justice? Now, the Clinton proposal would have required abortion participation as a condition for all hospitals to participate. So public hospitals would have been excluded. The more creative role hospitals or health systems could have had would be as a regional payer. Public healthcare would have been excluded from that as well. Professor Dougherty, with the appeals of the common good, must not inclusion of abortion, which is the seeds of the culture of death, must not that be a fatal flaw in any fundamental healthcare reform?
Well, I was working closely with the Catholic Health Association at that time on the board and dealing with their public policy and advocacy effort. And we were working as hard as we could. First of all, we supported about 80% of the Clinton plan, but didn't support, obviously, the abortion part. And so we were looking forward to the debate in Congress to get our friends to take that part out and let the rest of the coverage proceed. So that's how we saw the debate unfolding. But as you recall, there never was any debate in Congress because the thing kind of fell on its face by the time it got there. So I don't know how that would have ended. I think that if it was up or down, support this with abortion or not, the Catholic community would not have, at least the organized Catholic community would not have. So that would have been a poison pill.
The strategy of CHA, though, was to let the train out of the station with abortion as part of the plan.
Yes.
And with the hope that it could be stopped, disconnected, and derailed.
Yes.
And
well, it wasn't. Let me just sophisticate that. It wasn't the CHA's plan to let it out. It was coming out. And we were encouraging the discussion, but raising the abortion issue all the time as part of our price of being on the train.
Now, I think that one should reconsider the language of justice and rights. It's very hard to negotiate about justice. It's very hard to negotiate about rights. I think one should quit it, have a moratorium. Talk instead about an obligation to create a basic insurance package. And then you can negotiate about how that obligation gets expressed. The rhetorical absolutism of rights and justice language is unjust. It'll create a horrible outcome. We need to have a dialogue among citizens, experts, and politicians about creating a basic insurance package, and that can only be done about talking about a basic obligation to respond to those in need and creating an insurance package. So I think it is not right to talk about rights in health care, and it's unjust to talk about justice. One should move to a view of obligation. But if I could just take a moment to underscore, I think Roman Catholics have an opportunity to preserve the integrity of Christian health care. That opportunity is going to go away very soon. And you all are the 2,000-pound gorilla. You can make an immense difference, or you can step away. I mean, it's really a point where you're going to have to decide whether you'll maintain the integrity of your institutions or let them be overcome by a powerful culture that will erode it, and a one-payer system would be part of that.
And the structure is there to do that if it can be mobilized.
I just wanted to ask, you said in part of your solutions that you thought that we need to increase almsgiving, and I just wanted to underused, like how you think that can be better?
I mean, I don't know how you all do it. With us, if somebody's in our parish and needs health care, they can't afford it, they go to the pastor, who then asks the people in the parish council to come up with the money and pay for it. And so our priest, if he needs money right away, will walk up to the first 10 people he thinks and says, write a check now for 500, write a check for 500, write a check for 500, until he gets the money and pays. Another default person is the bishop. The bishop always has money to hand out for people in need. The understanding is we are a community of God with obligation. We'll give to non-Orthodox also, but because we have to respond, meet everyone as Christ coming in. And that's different from paying your taxes. I mean, paying your taxes is, hey, you don't have to love that, but you got to love the person to whom you take the money out of your pocket and give. And that's part of an instruction of what it is to be a Christian. There'll always be people in need. I mean, we rebuilt somebody's house who didn't have insurance. I mean, they needed $30,000. Well, we got the $30,000 together. That's what it is to have a community in Christ. Almsgiving like that has always been part of Christianity. If that dies out, we have lost an important part of our soul.
Let me just add another perspective on that. Is I would be the last one to diminish the significance of charity and helping people in need out of the sense of Christian solidarity with someone who's suffering. But I think certainly in our tradition we distinguish between love and justice, and that there are certain spheres in which justice, the themes of justice dominate more than charity. And just ask yourself, if we dissolve Medicare tomorrow, could we motivate the sense of charity in this country to do the job that the government is now doing with our taxes by a system that we all support? I think the answer is obvious. If we dissolve the public health, the public school system, could we all volunteer enough to make sure that the next generation of children could read? Well, I don't think so. So I think that while charity is important, and again, I wouldn't diminish it for the world, there's an area in which, in our public life, we need structures that support the many.
If those structures obscure the love in the human heart, we're lost. If we don't think that we could raise up the saints to make the difference, if all that went away, we've lost the call to holiness. When a priest gets ready for liturgy in the morning, he names 8 unmercenary physicians. There are about 22. They were the 8 physicians who went out in the history of Christianity to care without being paid. He only names 8 because the act of charity to go out and care for others is so central. They're named as one prepares for liturgy. One would hope that we could call people to holiness like Roman Catholicism call people to become nuns and brothers. If you don't see that radical call for holiness, I think a lukewarm call will never quite make it.
Additional questions? And I think the fact of the matter is that the Catholic healthcare system is large enough and influential enough to do a lot more than they're actually doing. But I think that they need to be encouraged to do that, and certainly they have to end the year on a positive note so they can stay in existence. But I think that we need to see more activity from them.
Isn't part of the difference in your approach is how you regard the good of health care? It seems to me that in one perception we've got health care being equated or with an analogy cars and PCs, whereas in which case if you don't have a car, you can still survive, you can still get by. On the other hand, isn't healthcare more like the good of food, where there is a necessity? If I have a garage full of food and my neighbors who I am in a society and in a relationship with are starving to death, yes, charity may be enough to motivate me to donate to them, but and to share my food with them. But if I don't, then isn't there an obligation in civil society within the public arena to come knocking on my door and say, you know what, you need to share some of your food because these people are going to die otherwise. They're not going to die without a Ford or a Volkswagen. They will die without food.
A quick response, and it is that we disagree on the following views. What counts as basic? I often go to China, and you can get a lot of bag in the United States for about probably $400 per person. Now the question is, at what point do you want to say you've met the basic obligation? If you let someone tune down the road in a Fiat rather than a Volvo, their chance of dying is much higher. All of our choices are choices of death. And so the connection between the two is to realize that if you don't guarantee everyone a Volvo, you're making the poor die more often in automobile crashes, which is true. What we have to do is to create, which we cannot discover, what's a basic package. And it's the focus on basic package that I took to be important. The other difference is the risks I took, real moral risks, for not making that distinction, using language of justice and rights, and being a supporter of an all-encompassing healthcare system. It's also the moral risks, which I take to be considerable, and how to look at them, that separate us as well.
Last comment.
Well, I think that your question is right, that within healthcare itself, there's a wide range of what you might consider basic and what ends up looking like a luxury item, or looking like something in Tristan's terms that we simply couldn't afford for everyone. But I think, and maybe here's another place where we disagree, I think that when you define basic, you don't go to China to look for it. You look for it in your own communities, because that gives you a sense for what are the local standards for what counts as basic.
Shanghai has a better life expectancy than we. You might want to learn something from what they can do with a little bit of you on.
Well, life expectancy is not the only way to judge a healthcare system, because part of our life expectancy problem is violence, murder, a number of other social problems we have that are not really the responsibility of our healthcare system.
Well, I think we've tried to solve this problem. We've gotten part way. We've not completed it yet. So I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank the two speakers tonight.
I'm going to run this. An old friend of mine finally like check himself into an alcohol camp that's overdue. We have some basic experiences for how true innovation actually gets done.
No question. The whole conference was at INSEAD, which is a big business school outside of Paris. Yeah, but no question. Such quick ad hoc.